Welcome back to Carbon Bros. I'm Amy Westervelt.
And I'm Daniel Penny, and we are back after a little hiatus to bring you our long-awaited mailbag episode.
Yeah, we got so many good responses from people. We got voice notes, we got emails, and they're all over the spectrum. So excited to talk about them here.
And yeah, some of these folks are in the climate movement. Others are people who are interested in the problems of toxic masculinity and had some ideas for us, shared their experiences, their questions. Some of the questions are more comments than questions. We like those too.
Yeah, they're all really interesting and like really different perspectives. I was like, oh, our listeners are smart and thoughtful people. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, guys. So without further ado, let's get into it. So this question comes from Trevor Lehman, or Lehman, we do not know how to pronounce your last name, who is a university career counselor, humanist chaplain, and the president of Climate Informed Counselors chapter of the Canadian Counselors and Psychotherapists Association.
That's right. So we didn't even just get people from one country. We got a global response here.
That's right. We're
amazing.
Worldwide. And Trevor's question was, I'm wondering if vocational psychology and theories such as Bluestein's psychology of working theory is ever explored as part of the de-radicalizing process in our current climate space. Though there is a lot of discussion about religious and internet radicalization, I'm wondering if teaching unionization/labor organizing as well as community building more generally can be incorporated into the present moment to alleviate tension through social change.
Yeah, I loved this because I was like, oh, I have not thought about this at all. And I think it's a good idea. Just a quick, I'll be honest, I had to Google Bluestein's psychology of working theory. It's basically like a perspective on career counseling that brings in like the entire personhood of someone, like where they're coming from in life, like what is their class and race and gender background or ability status or immigration status, and like how those things intersect with the work that they do or the work that they're able to do. And like, wow, I've heard so many conversations about retraining the workforce as part of like a just transition in terms of like skills and matching people with new jobs. But I have not heard much at all about the psychological component to that or about this idea of like labor organizing as community building and how that kind of comes into the climate movement. So, yeah, I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do touch on this a little bit in a way with the discussion in episode 3 around the oil workers in Louisiana and who are all getting involved in carbon pipelines and this sort of allegiance to the fossil fuel industry and the way in which their like life opportunities are shaped almost completely by their region's dependence on the industry. And
I haven't seen much about sort of like taking this kind of approach to dealing with it aside from more of a skills-based approach, except for actually the guy in Louisiana that you talked to did really get into like how do we connect these new jobs and new skills with like the identity that these people have and the communities that they've like been in for generations. And, you know, like how do we bring people in without making them feel like villainized or disrespected or, you know, all of those kinds of things too. I just think it's interesting. So anyway, very curious to hear if like other people are working on this. And also, Trevor, if you're listening, if you start applying this in your work, we'd like to hear about it. It's interesting.
Tell us how it goes.
Yeah. Okay. This next one is from Al Whittle, and this is a voice note. So we're going to play you a little snippet of it here, and then we're going to talk about it.
Hello, I'm Al. I basically spent about 30 years working in the construction and architecture industry. Means I'm always kind of in a fairly male dominated environment. We have to figure out how you get environmental issues to relate personally to guys. Sometimes you get people who say, I don't care. Quite often, to be honest, I find avoiding trigger words that immediately put the barriers up, and words like climate change. So it becomes more a case of manoeuvring the conversation. One way I can try and explain is a personal thing where I found you certainly don't tell male colleagues in the average office that you're vegan. That seems to be an immediate trigger to some people's morality. But I was working at one place and it turned out another guy was. He was sort of fending off a few pointed questions, and when I wandered by, it was a case of, you're vegan? Oh, sound, mate, that's good. I feel like I've got a brother from another mother here, and before you know it, we're chatting about it quite happily, and then other people are actually starting to soften to it, and they hopefully realise that they're not going to have, my life choices or this particular gent's life choices sort of forced on them. It was just a bit of humour and things begin to change. I guess another thing that is worth mentioning is dealing with people on an individual level rather than trying to take on groups. There you can actually sort of involve yourself and get interested in people's decisions and choices and have a far more sort of meaningful conversation.
This is the type of individual action that I feel like is actually helpful and necessary within climate spaces. Like, individual action often gets boiled down to just what we buy, or like recycling, but it's like actually these kinds of conversations or like modeling certain behaviors, all of like the social science research on, how we pick up different ideas and behaviors from each other. It's like this stuff. It's not, like so-and-so has cool bamboo straws. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So
Yes.
like, as much as, because sometimes I feel like when we talk about, the very systemic efforts to obstruct climate policy, some people take that as like, it doesn't matter what I do individually. Either in sort of a defeatist and doomer kind of way, or as a sort of like, we need to be focused on the oil companies. And I kind of feel like, look, there are various ways that individual action can be helpful. And to me, actually, like, this seems like one of them.
Yeah, I mean, this is doing politics on the community level or the individual level.
Yeah,
And the right is very comfortable doing that. Like they're very
correct.
happy to think
There's
about
no conversation too small.
exactly.
Yeah.
There's no conversation
Yeah.
too small that can't be redirected to right-wing talking points, or especially
Yeah.
like the religious right. I mean, they spend so much energy personally proselytizing, right,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
trying to convert people one by one, and it adds
Yeah.
up, right? So I'm not saying that you should spend your life as a zealot of the climate, trying to make everyone in your personal life talk to you about climate change. Um, but I do think, yeah, that there's absolutely room for redirecting conversations, and as he says, avoiding the third rails. Um,
Yeah.
that's
Or the
always
things that like immediately make people defensive and yeah. Okay. The next one. Ooh, yeah, I want to have you read. Maybe just read this whole one because it's
okay.
pretty short.
This is from Dan Stein. He is the founder and executive director of Giving Green, which is a group that advises on climate philanthropy, helping donors to navigate a complex landscape and direct their resources for maximum impact. So here's Dan's question. The question is about intersectionality. Many climate groups on the left, Sunrise Movement is a great example, have really leaned into intersectionality, meaning they also work towards many other non-climate progressive goals. This has strengths and weaknesses, and I think the climate community endlessly debates whether this is a good idea. It seems like one of the ways that the manosphere has exploited this is by tying climate to other left-wing ideas that have less popular support, like trans rights. When listening to the podcast, I felt like it was a good argument for intersectionality equals bad. On the other hand, one could argue that the right is just doing intersectionality as well and having success, i.e., tying men's rights to climate. I don't have really any answers here, but I'd like to hear you smart people discuss whether these recent trends can shed light on the debate and whether leaning into intersectionality on the progressive left is a good or bad tactic.
Ooh, okay. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I feel like there is this like Ezra Klein wing of the Democrats right now who are um, like pretty consistently making the argument that intersectionality is a bad approach. And I would like to offer a counter argument to that.
Okay, let's hear it.
And it goes like this. The reason that Democrats arguing for things like trans rights and abortion rights and things like that have fallen flat, in my opinion, is that they haven't actually advocated for anyone's rights. What they've done is wrap neoliberalism in the language of equality and ignored everyone's like actual problems. So like, yeah, if you are, wrapping yourself in a rainbow flag while not addressing, wage stagnation and inflation and all of these things that people are dealing with in their daily lives, you seem like an elitist, tone deaf person. That does not mean, which is how I feel like so many Democratic pundits have taken it, that like people are mad about trans rights. I don't actually think that if people's lives were working, you'd be able to get this many people riled up about trans rights. Like, is there an underlying hatred that can be tapped into? Of course. Can you tap into that hatred when people are doing well? A lot harder, like a lot harder. So this idea that like, oh, we got too woke and that's like the problem. I just don't think that that's true. And I think the biggest issue is that the progressive left hasn't really done intersectionality, hasn't done it like authentically, hasn't done it well, and hasn't actually addressed the biggest issue that's facing like, across all of those groups, which is basic civil rights and class issues. In my opinion, the biggest blind spot for both the Democrats and the climate movement is class. I cannot tell you how many times I have been in a room full of Climate Foundation people who I'm like, oh, like these people have no idea what it's like to look in their pantry and be like, how many different ways can I make lentils until I get paid? I'm just like, you guys have no idea. Like, I had the experience like as I was, working on climate journalism stuff of like my having to like distract my kids while my car's being repossessed out of the driveway. And like, I'm just like, there's like a very, very slim percentage of people within this movement who like can relate to that in any way. And that is a problem.
So I'm gonna kind of flip it. I actually, in a sense, agree that intersectionality is bad. I don't think that intersectionality is actually a very useful basis for politics because it seems, at least as it's played out in the last 10 years, to become a series of litmus tests and like purity tests where like
completely down to just identity politics and that's it.
Exactly. It's like if you want to be on the team, then like you have to agree with A, you have to agree with B, you have to agree with C. And it becomes a very inward facing posture. That makes it very difficult to bring in so-called political independents who are a third of the electorate in the US. And a lot of people have like a mixed bag of political beliefs and opinions and some kind of problematic social beliefs.
And just like a hefty serving of ignorance.
Yeah, exactly.
Too.
Exactly.
Like we don't know what we don't know. And it should be okay to make mistakes and not be like, have your life ended.
So I'm going to flip it and say, I actually think like solidarity is a much better political concept for the climate movement and for all the movements of the left to start thinking about. Of course, we're at the low watermark for union density in America. And I think that sort of erosion of people with like experience being a part of organized labor is a big part of why
Yeah.
we've lost our concept of solidarity and like what solidarity actually means. You don't have to be in total alignment with someone to take part in an
Yes.
action of solidarity to support them, because it's an understanding that like me having your back means that you have my back. It's not
Yeah.
out of charity. It's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's a strategic and kind of collective politics where like you recognize your mutual interdependence and the fact that your strength only comes through concerted action.
And your shared enemy. We're all like pointing everyone at these different groups that don't actually have power.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, let's bring back solidarity. It is time maybe to
Yes.
ditch intersectionality. I think it's an exhausted political concept. And, I mean, there is no threat more all-encompassing, more totalizing than the climate crisis.
Yeah.
And it's one that will definitely demand solidarity as things start happening, in your community, in your state, in your
Yeah.
country, and all around the world, right?
Solidarity, which is, to your point, an adaptation strategy as much as it is, a political strategy. It's like we're going to need solidarity and community building to survive the climate crisis and to fight against the various things that are coming, along with it. Plus, like, you're never going to win against billionaires and huge global industries without solidarity. Like, people who only identify themselves as being concerned about climate are a small group of people. But like, we know that globally, I don't know, that what did this Yale thing say? 89% of people
Yes.
want their governments to act on climate, right? So there's like actually a majority.
Yeah, a little bit lower here in the US. I think we're in the 70s here. But
But still, like,
that's
that's
because of all of the
pretty.
psyops.
Yeah, exactly. I like this. I like this, like, this idea of shifting the focus to solidarity. It feels better. It doesn't put people on the defensive. It allows for, people to be at varying points along the spectrum. you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I
if
like
there are
it.
any progressive think tanks who want to come pay me to expound on this idea, please
Yes.
hit me up.
Hire Daniel. Yeah. Yeah. I like that idea a lot. Awesome. We solved it. Good job. Um, okay. Next, we have a friend of the pod, let's say,
Yes,
Callum Hood.
friend of the pod.
Yeah. He actually, you know what? He's the person who told me about non-toxic first. I met him at a conference and he was like, "Oh, you should listen to this podcast." And then actually immediately Lucy von Sturmer also was like, "You should listen to this podcast." And I was like, "Wow, everybody's telling me about this podcast." Okay. But yes, Callum Hood works for the Center for Countering Digital Hate, and he sent in a voice message that we're going to play right now.
Hey Carbon Bros, this is Callum. I work at the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, where I look at stuff to do with online masculinity, content, climate misinformation as well. And one of the things I was thinking about while listening to the series and learning a lot was how primary is masculinity as a lever through which climate deniers persuade young men? Is it the culture war or substantial issues like climate come first, or is it the masculinity stuff comes first and is a way into these men to persuade them on a wider range of issues?
I actually think this is a really interesting question, like what comes first? And I do wonder if like the masculinity stuff is a bit of a like lever or like an on-ramp to the
Yes.
other stuff. I mean, we saw this in Kayla's research too for Media Matters, right? That like these are, for the most part, these are not like a lot of the climate denier content is not like just that. It's like in a comedy podcast or in a whatever, like a wellness influencer podcast or whatever. And like they're coming there for a certain type of like male experience, not for climate denial.
But as we saw, with your investigation of Michael Schellenberger, there are people who go from climate to masculinity. There is, as these two groups, climate deniers and the manosphere, become more and more intertwined, there are people who are drifting from the climate side and getting in on the masculinity grift. But I do think,
Yeah.
to your point, yes, for the average consumer, it starts with, fairly benign masculinity questions. Most people aren't thinking about climate one way or another. There are very few people who are worrying about like whether the ocean is becoming too acidic. But there are a lot of men who are worried about whether they're manly enough, right? Like that's a sort of
Yeah.
foundational part of like male psychology, that your masculinity is always shaky, is like needs
Yeah.
constant affirmation and firming up, and that you need to seek that instruction or validation or have images reflected back to you that teach you or kind of put down other alternatives. And I think really that's what's driving people into the funnel.
Yeah, I think so too. I really think so. Okay, let's see. Laura Supple is next. So this is a voice note again.
Hi, Drill Team. This is Laura in Denver. I absolutely loved the Carbon Bros miniseries. But one thing where I was like, how could you not talk about this? A basic premise of extractive capitalism is this idea of the zero-sum game, that if one is getting something, that means someone else is missing out. And everything is about competition, and there's no room for cooperation. And I think that a lot of movements have bought into the logic of a zero-sum game, that if we're talking about climate, we can't be talking about trans rights, or if we're talking about water and clean water, then we can't be talking about human rights. And we miss the fact that all of our movements are fighting different heads of the same monster.
I think this actually kind of gets at the solidarity thing that you were just talking about. That it's not a zero-sum game of like, if we talk about trans stuff, then we can't talk about climate stuff. Or if we talk about women's rights, then we can't talk about solar panels or whatever.
Though I think, interestingly, from inside the left, it can feel like a zero-sum game because you're all competing for the same dollars from the same
Yes.
donors. And
Yeah.
there is this sense that like, well, the issue du jour is X. So I'm putting I don't mean X, the company. No, that was an issue du jour. I think it's sort of like lost its luster, and now people are like, well, I'm actually more interested in AI. We're gonna put our money, like the fickleness of funding.
Yes,
is a real
it's
thing.
Huge problem. Yeah,
And so I do think this sense of like all the different like interest groups are fighting among each other for attention or for money, that is kind of a real dynamic.
this is a very key difference between the left and the right. This funding problem. Like I spent. So I have a book coming out next year, and I spent a lot of time researching like how different corporate interests and like billionaire interests kind of shaped the information environment. And one of like the focal points was think tanks. And so I spent a lot of time in a bunch of different archives looking at like, letters that Charles Koch wrote way back when and things like that. And it's very, very clear to me that like there is a long view and a real sense of like investing in a talent pipeline and really understanding that like, oh, we need to actually shift the broader like landscape in which people are just thinking about things in general, that just like long-term funding commitments that do not exist on the left. Certainly not in climate spaces that I've seen. They have like a real magpie shiny penny problem in the like left funding space where, yeah, it's just like, ooh, this, ooh, that. I talked to someone the other day who like told me that their like nonprofit organization, as a response to Kayla's Media Matters paper that had all the like that graph with all the circles on it that showed like how
Showed the
much,
political orientation and of the different podcasts and what their listener count was.
yeah, that like, and this is like a large nonprofit organization in response to just that one paper, which to me, not a knock on Kayla at all, but like was not new information. Everyone was like, oh my God. And they got rid of their entire like content and media team to like focus that budget solely on influencers. And I've seen like a lot of organizations are like, oh my God, what's our influencer strategy? Like, what's our, podcast strategy, this, that, the other, right? And I'm just like,
And you saw that Taylor Lorenz story that she wrote for Wired about like the Democratic dark money in
oh yeah.
influencers, and then they were all like kind of coordinating, like, so do we take these $7,000 a post or whatever?
Yes. Yes, totally. To me, that's not like the lesson to be learned from the right, but I feel like that is often happening in progressive spaces and issue spaces like climate, where it's like, I don't know, just this like very reactive, like whatever the most recent thing has that the right has done, like even actually in response to all of like the campus activism that Turning Point USA was doing, right? Like there's this huge thing now, like, oh, like how do we get young people and like how do we recapture young men, all of that. And I'm like, that took like 10 to 15 years of like showing up on campuses. Milo Yiannopoulos was doing it like before Turning Point existed, like
Yeah.
it's like that didn't just happen.
That's how I got my start as a cultural critic, was writing about
Milo, yeah. I'm like, that didn't just happen. Like, that was a strategy, and it was heavily funded and supported for over a decade before it like bore fruit. And I don't know if there's anything to compare it to on the left that has had like that level of, which is so funny because like if you spend a lot of time in right-wing spaces, which I do, to just listen to what's going on, they're really convinced that there's this like super well-funded, long-term culture war strategy. Like Leonard Leo's whole new thing right now is this like cultural organization that's fighting against that. And like, I'm like, I listen to these conversations and watch these presentations, and I'm like, I really wish that like anyone on the left was remotely as organized as they're afraid of us being.
Our advice to avoid this problem: donors,
Yeah.
stay in your lane, keep
Yeah.
supporting the cause that you care about and that got you started in the first place.
And like the strategy and methods that you actually know something about too. You know what I mean? It's like, and give people time for it to work. No strategy works in 2 years. Like that's not a thing.
Okay.
Okay, rant over.
and fund our endeavors. That's our last piece of advice.
The next piece of feedback came from Florent Cantu about the peak oil movement. So she writes, "Hi, love the show. In one of the episodes, I think you mentioned peakism as a right-wing movement, but according to Matthew Schneider Meyerson's surveys, peak oil believers sociology is predominantly left-wing, not right-wing, although it has ties to libertarianism too." So I was very happy to get this because it prompted me to read Matthew Schneider Meyerson's book, which is called Peak Oil, Apocalyptic Environmentalism and Libertarian Political Culture. And it is fascinating. And also, our reference to peakism came from Hannah Morris's more recent research on this subject, and she did not describe it as like being rooted in right-wing ideology. So if that is,
But rather that it's become a right wing.
it's become that, right? Exactly. Right, exactly. So like if we presented it that way, that's my fault. Because we just kind of started at the point where it was already libertarian. What Schneider Meyerson does in his book is like show how these mostly men who were in many cases like kind of counterculture 1960s type liberals really like took the idea of like going your own way and that type of freedom and like that morphed into libertarianism and the Tea Party and whatnot in the US, which I think is super, super, super interesting. And again, kind of an example of this horseshoe theory thing where it's like this can swing in different directions.
And in the case of the countercultural left to the right, there's a lot of research, especially focusing on California as the like, epicenter of this, where people went from kind of like separatism or back to land communities into like the tech space and bringing that thinking of kind of rejecting traditional boundaries of the liberal order and then becoming this kind of like libertarian project, which I think is quite interesting. And to your point, this concept of peak oil starts as a concern among the left, similar to the population bomb, which we talked about. Too much demand, not enough supply, and society, we're going to like hit a cliff and society's going to explode.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you absolutely see this like in the roots of the tech industry and sort of the techno or like cyber libertarianism that we get today. So, oh God, I don't know if we should do this one or not. This last one.
I'll read it. I can afford to be canceled.
Okay.
I won't say who this comes from. I'm going to protect the identity of the person. And also, FBI who's listening, this is parody. This is
parody.
This is not real. So this listener, who may or may not exist, wrote, "Hi, you asked for solutions not discussed on the 4th episode of Carbon Bros, and I have one that I totally understand if you don't, but a right-wing influencer was defeated in a debate recently, and a lot of people are cheering. The method was a bit unusual and usually preferred by the right, but I think with the right messaging, it could help get men on board. Sorry if this is the wrong address. I couldn't find one in the show notes."
Wow. I do appreciate the way this is framed as a debate defeat.
It was the ultimate defeat. But yes, Carbon Bros is not endorsing assassination. Let's be clear.
No.
But I do think, even though this is written in a very tongue-in-cheek way, it does raise an important point, which is, we've been doing this show. We've talked a little bit about political violence on the part of the right against climate protesters. Obviously, you've done way more work with Drilled in prior seasons on violence committed usually by the state or by the state on behalf of oil companies.
Right.
But this is a whole other animal, and we're living in an era, of just really alarming political violence committed by individuals who, this question of like right, left, like we don't even know. The shooter seems to just be like internet pilled.
Right. And actually to have quite a lot of like confusion and complex ideas about like gender roles and identity and what's happening with the country and all of these kinds of things too, where it's like, I don't know. I feel like it's also, God, there's so much like propaganda and misinformation flowing around this that like, it's very hard to tell.
Around Charlie Kirk's shooting.
Yeah. Like it's hard to tell, what this person believed. And then, there's a lot of conspiracy theories around him not even being like him being a patsy. And it's like, it runs the gamut. So like, and I have not seen great evidence of anything. So I'm sort of like reserving judgment for when we know more. But the conversations around it, which actually remind me a lot of the conversations around Luigi Mangione and that whole
Yes. Hashtag free Luigi.
incident. Yeah, like that was also really interesting because he is another like not explicitly right or left person. I think a lot of commentators are missing that like a lot of younger people don't identify in that way and don't have these very explicit lines between the two.
It's very vibes based.
Yeah. A friend of mine was the NPR reporter who got like assigned to covering Luigi Mangione. Completely like coincidentally, she was on when the Mangione thing happened. And so she's now like the person who does like has kept on that.
Yeah, with the case. Yeah. Because that still hasn't gone to trial. Like,
no, I know. And so she'll put little Easter eggs in her posts for us where she's like, check out the picture of Luigi's shoes. Like, okay, nice one.
What this writer brings up, anarchists had this whole idea of doing political assassinations in the late 19th and early 20th century. It was called propaganda of the deed.
Right.
And it didn't really work out well for anarchism in the United States. It led to a lot of people being jailed and killed, and the political philosophy of anarchism was really marginalized on the left in the wake of that violence. So I think we're living in this era of insane violence and simultaneously political stasis. Like the government is literally shut down as we're recording this episode.
Right.
And that leads people to feel like they have no option but to take matters into their own hands. I also just watched One Battle After Another last week, the new Paul
I really
Thomas
want to watch
Anderson
that
movie, which focuses on a left-wing terror cell who are hunted by Colonel Lockjaw, played by Sean Penn. And it doesn't work out well for the French 75, which is the name of this terrorist cell.
Also a great drink. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, everyone has an amazing name in this film. So I, at least personally, am not, based on my cursory study of history and my fear of being arrested or murdered, do not think that the left should pursue this strategy. And, it's already, I think, it's being wielded by the right as a cudgel to crack down on legitimate civil disobedience and dissent in a way that's truly alarming. And I think, including climate, there are groups who are getting, threatened to have their nonprofit status taken away because they supposedly somehow advocate for left idea that the Trump administration is now trying to classify as terrorism.
They're doing that even with the No Kings protests. Like, I don't know if you saw Mike Johnson talking about those protests that are coming up, and he was like, it's a hate America protest that's all like Antifa and this, that, it's like, and pro Hamas, like they've kind of like set the groundworks, and then they're going to use that to justify, sending in the National Guard and locking people up and all of that stuff. The one thing I was going to say about the political violence stuff is that there's a researcher that I talk to like regularly for updates on like what's happening with repression of protest, because she studies this and like studies the history of it and like how it fits in with social change and all of that stuff. And she was telling, like, she does, Dana Fisher is her name. She shows up at protests and she surveys people about a bunch of different things. And then she
sounds like a narc.
Tracks it. Yeah, right. Yeah.
If I were a protester and someone started like asking me questions,
like, why do you want to know?
I would
it's
not.
True. Actually, I do wonder how much that shapes the answers that because like before, especially now, I don't know. But anyway, before the Charlie Kirk shooting and before the ICE, like before these like National Guards going into cities and stuff, even then, like the very first No Kings protest and even like some of the ones that were happening in January and December too, she was finding just like a clear trend of like people increasingly either like increasingly saying not that they themselves wanted to engage in political violence, but that they were concerned that that would be the only thing that would drive change.
The only recourse.
And yeah, that like, and that they just had, it's sort of like dwindling hopes for some kind of a solution that didn't involve that to this like extreme situation in the US. So
How should we wrap this thing up, Amy?
Oh yeah, a wrap up. That's it for this time. We will have a bonus episode for you next week as well. And hopefully we'll have more stuff coming for you soon.
Thanks so much for listening to Carbon Bros. And thank you to everyone who sent us a question.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Makes us feel good to know got some listeners out there. And I want to say to all of our listeners, stay safe if you choose to engage in some kind of protests in the coming weeks and months. To take proper precautions, get on Signal.
Yeah. Get on Signal. You know, maybe start planning an exit strategy for your time outside the US. Just saying, not a bad idea.
But yeah, talk to other people, be safe out there, and there'll be more coming from Drilled and perhaps from Carbon Bros in the months to come.